When working with young children, it's important to include assessment as part of the package. So we don't just want to plan activities and do fun things related to helping children to achieve developmental milestones. We also want to see if our efforts are having the desired effect. So it's important to spend time observing children in their play and during their time with activities, to record the results of that observation and to document work that children are engaging in. So take pictures, write notes, but making sure that we're collecting information that helps us to think about how children are doing in our educational environments or other professional environments and how we can make them better. There are various assessment types that can be used, and your book gives a lot of really great information about these different kinds of assessment that are useful in working with young children. So I would encourage you to take a look at pages 165 to 174 in your text. But just kind of a brief overview real quick. One, we can use something that's called developmental screening. So the idea here is that prior to beginning to work with a child, you give them some sort of assessment to see what skills they have. And then once you've determined what skills are present, then you can decide what kinds of services you should provide to the child. And maybe you might also learn that this child needs further assessment so that you can do even a better job of figuring out what that child might need. So one example of developmental screening is when we give children readiness assessments. So we see if they are ready, and one of the most popular ones is to see if they are ready for kindergarten. So a lot of times young children in preschool will be asked to complete readiness assessment profiles to determine what their needs in kindergarten might be. So we're going to talk more extensively about kindergarten readiness in the remainder of the lecture. In a few slides, we'll work our way over to that, but we're just going to start with a more general conversation about assessment first. So other kinds of assessment are ones where we have a child who's already with us, and then we're going to do some sort of assessment to make sure that we're planning the right activities, that the activities that we've planned are working, that the things we're doing in the classroom or in our professional environments are the right ones, and should we be altering or changing anything to better support children's learning and development. So I'm going to jump to standardized tests first, and because this is something I think you're more familiar with. So standardized tests are those Common Core assessments or whatever kind of standardized tool you want to use to assess how children are doing in your classroom. We don't usually use a lot of that with young children because the methods for implementing standardized tests aren't really very developmentally appropriate, sitting children down and having them fill in pieces of paper and try to bubble in small spaces when they're just getting their motor skills under control. A lot of times the results of standardized tests don't get released right away, so by then the child's already moved on to other things and other skills, and it's not really giving you a lot of information in real time. So better with young children is to do authentic assessment, so observing them in action, making notes, audio recording, video recording, collecting work samples, using running records, using checklists that are appropriate for whatever it is you want to be observing. And again, take a look at your text. It gives you a lot of good information about what authentic assessment looks like, particularly in early childhood. And then also, I would encourage you to take a look at the handout that I've included on this page, to look at the ages and stages link that I've provided, because it gives you a really nice breakdown of what the differences are between a developmental screening and assessment, so that maybe will help you to understand better what those two types of assessment are and what they're used for. Although the upcoming slides are going to focus on kindergarten readiness and kindergarten readiness assessment, I did want to just talk briefly about the importance of making sure to use all assessment with young children in the most appropriate way possible. So your text does a great job outlining some of the considerations that you should make before, during, and after assessment of young children, but I just wanted to go over a few of the points on this slide. One, it's super important that whatever information you get should be held confidential. It should be kept private. We want to make sure that information only goes to those who need to know, parents, teachers in the classroom. If the child is being referred for special services, then information could be possibly shared with that professional, but you want to be judicious. You want to make sure that you're protecting children's confidentiality. Your book also talks about authentic assessment. So basically with young children, and NAYC, the National Association for the Education of Young Children, really doesn't recommend standardized assessment, the kind that you're used to seeing in school with bubble tests and whatnot. They really don't recommend that until age 8 or later. So because this is a preschool class, maybe kindergarten at best, standardized assessments are really not something that we should be considering. So authentic assessment instead utilizes information from parents and teachers. It collects work samples from young children, observes them doing tasks in the classroom. So, authentic in terms of in context, what real children can do, not what they are doing when they sit down to take a paper and pencil test, which isn't appropriate at that age. Looking at them more than once, sometimes children just are having an off day. It's not the best time of day for them. It's not the right kind of activity for them to display a particular skill. So making sure that you observe them multiple times in multiple contexts to make sure that you see the best of what they can do. The interpretations part. So, just because one assessment said something, you don't want to jump to the conclusion, they're not going to be successful in kindergarten. They have a disability and need to be referred immediately for special services. One, you never want to make a judgment on one assessment. And two, for the most part, me included, classroom teachers and most folks who work with young children, we're not experts in assessment, and therefore we shouldn't be leaping to wild conclusions based on the assessment data that we collected. We really want to make sure that we work with a school psychologist, someone who's trained in assessment, to make sure that what we're going to say about the results of an assessment is correct and true. You always have to think about culture and language. Is that child's best language to be working in? Is there something about that child's culture that would make the particular assessment that you're using or the results that you're getting less than valid? So always important to consider. And then finally, you just want to make sure that you're always assessing children in all of their developmental domains. You may only do a cognitive assessment and think that a child is behind, but then when you turn around and do a social emotional assessment, they're way ahead of the pack. So you want to make sure that you get a full picture of what that child can do developmentally. So as I mentioned earlier, a lot of times when children are finishing preschool and heading off to kindergarten, we give them some sort of readiness assessment to see what their kindergarten skills are. So really the basic premise of a kindergarten readiness assessment is, or a developmental screen, is the idea that children are supposed to have a certain set of skills, that there's a set of skills you're going to need when you get to kindergarten, and so we want to check you out ahead of time to make sure that you do indeed have those skills and you do indeed have those capabilities. So one kind of potential problem with kindergarten readiness is not everybody agrees completely on what those skills are. Some readiness assessments focus more heavily on academic kinds of things. Some do include motor development and physical health and social emotional development and the interest in learning and being part of a kindergarten classroom. So it's we'll talk a little bit more about this on the next slide, but just so that you understand that there's not complete consensus about what these skills are. So then obviously these developmental screens or these kindergarten readiness assessment tools might look different from each other. So the better definitions of readiness are more broad-based, include more attention to a variety of developmental skills. So you can see the National Education Goals Panel, way back in 2000, decided that readiness should encompass physical well-being and motor development, social-emotional development, approaches to learning, communication and language use, and cognition and general knowledge. So you can see in the graphic to the left that a lot of that stuff is kind of encapsulated. So the academic one has some kind of traditional cognitive general knowledge kind of information in it. It has things related to language and literacy. The self-regulatory would be kind of the social emotional development and the approaches to learning. There's the motor skills in there, not necessarily physical well-being, but at least fine motor. And then we've got some social expression, so being able to communicate well with others and having healthy social emotional development. So those would be the better definitions of readiness, again, ones that are more broad-based. So kindergarten readiness is a hot topic, and these developmental screens exist for a reason, because there are estimates that as many as 60% of children do not have these skills. They do not have the skills that will necessarily help them to be successful in kindergarten. So it doesn't mean we should start pushing children in preschool to make sure that they have these skills. It means that we need to make sure that kindergarten is ready for children who may need more work and more time with these skills. So if these readiness assessments are used in that way, if they're used in a way that we can identify children who might need additional support when they get to kindergarten, that's going to be useful and helpful, because then we can make sure that the kindergarten environment is ready for children who are coming in, rather than the flip where we say 60% of children aren't ready, we better be working harder in preschool, because that may not really be the best strategy. There is evidence to show that pushing children too hard too early does not have good outcomes. So better to think about what we can do to give children the most skills that they have and make sure that they get opportunities to attend early childhood environments, and then support them when they get to kindergarten. So even though I just recommended on the previous slide that probably the best thing to do with this information about what it takes to be successful in kindergarten, and the fact that many children aren't ready, would be to think about how we can provide supports in kindergarten, that doesn't always happen. So the three most common ways actually are not the one that I suggested. They are instead having standards for pre-K environments. So that would be those learning foundations that we have been using in this class. So using those learning foundations to think about what kinds of things we should be doing with preschool age children to make sure that they are ready. And there is information about standards in your textbook that you should take a look at. Another option is to give these readiness assessment tests, and then potentially, if children don't do well on those assessments, to have them not come to kindergarten. Or again, like I said, let them come to kindergarten and then make sure to support them if they aren't doing well on that readiness assessment, if they're missing some skills. And then sometimes we change the age of entry. So we just say, hey, maybe what we're asking is too hard for kids who are too little, so we're just not going to have kids come until they're older. So we're going to be talking about what each of these strategies looks like in more detail, and then we're also going to look at the potential pluses and minuses of employing these various strategies. So as I said, one strategy for making sure that children are kindergarten ready is to have pre-K standards. So early learning standards are expectations for what children should be learning and how they should be developing. So as an early childhood educator, you could go into pre-K standards for your state and you could see, okay, these are the kinds of things that I should be working on for young children to make sure that they are as ready as they can be for kindergarten. And good standards are based on children's developmental milestones. So you can see that I've been in this class using milestones synonymously with those foundations, which in the state of California are the early learning guidelines or the standards. So I've been giving you the foundations, what it says in the foundations document, as examples of milestones, because California did a good job of creating early learning guidelines or foundations or standards, whatever you want to call them, that actually align with what children actually are able to do at these particular ages. So standards are not a bad thing, as long as, again, they are developmentally appropriate and really match what children are able to do at particular ages. And then you can use them as a guide. You can go to that early learning guidelines document and you can have a sense for what kinds of things would be good to work on. Now, it doesn't mean you have to work on them through direct instruction and worksheets and those kinds of things. You should be working on them through child-directed play-based activities where you're facilitating, but we know through evidence that that kind of educational approach paired with standards can help children to be ready for kindergarten, can give them some of the skills that they will need to be able to be more successful when they get there. So the rest of this slide is just reminding you that in California, the California Department of Education, the Child Development Division, developed these early learning standards. We know that they have the infant toddler version that has 36-month-old children in it, and then there's also the preschool learning foundations that have children age 48 and 60 months of age. And then again, you can see at the bottom, just reiterating what I just said, that these standards can help educators to know what to focus their curriculum and activities on to help assure that children are as ready as they can be for kindergarten without sacrificing what early childhood should be about, and that child-initiated, play-based, hands-on kind of learning. Another strategy that we've already talked about is giving children readiness assessment measures. So giving them those developmental screens that can help us to see what's missing, what we might need to work on once children get to kindergarten. So these are often referred to as KRAs or KEAs. So KRA is a kindergarten readiness assessment and a KEA is a kindergarten entry assessment. Both mean the same thing, just using different language. So in the state of California, we have something called the DRDPK, which is aligned with the preschool learning foundations. So both of these documents were developed in conjunction with each other, and the DRDPK measures some of the foundations that are in the foundations document. So if you work in state-funded preschool, you are probably familiar with the DRDP already, which is the Desired Results Developmental Profile, which is what we use when children are in our preschool classrooms that are state-funded to determine how well they are acquiring the developmental milestones or the foundations in the preschool learning foundations document. So this is a separate version of the DRDP, and it is looking at children's readiness for kindergarten. And I have provided the link on this page so you can take a look and see how that's laid out and what kinds of things this screening assessment tool would be looking for. I wanted to point out a couple things with readiness assessment tools just to make sure that you understand how they should be used. So as I kind of alluded to earlier, they should be used simply to find out what children know and don't know and what we can help them with once they get to kindergarten. They should not be used for placement decisions. So they shouldn't be used ahead of the kindergarten period to say, hey, you can't come. You're not allowed to come because you're not ready and you didn't do what you were supposed to do beforehand. Because again, that's going to put a lot of pressure on individual children and on preschool programs to potentially be doing something that's developmentally inappropriate. So I'm very pleased to report that in California, this developmental screen isn't administered until the first it's administered during the first 8 weeks of school, not before children enter kindergarten. And that way it really can be a screening tool. You've got that child there, and now you're figuring out what it is they're going to need extra support and help with. So California is really doing it right in terms of how this developmental screening process is being used, because we should be using the results of these assessments to drive what interventions we provide and what instruction we're offering to young children. So the results should be used to help children gain needed skills and should help teachers to plan appropriate activities and learning experiences, not knock kids out before they ever even got to the kindergarten door. And they should be broad in scope, like I was talking about earlier. They should include reference to all of children's developmental skills, because all of those skills are important to how well children will do later on in kindergarten. The final strategy that we'll talk about with regard to making sure that children are ready or as ready as they can be when they get to kindergarten is changing the age of entry. So many states have cutoff periods by which you have to turn 5. So when I went to graduate school in Indiana, you had to be 5 by July to be able to come into kindergarten in the fall. California used to have a really, really late date. So once upon a time, you didn't have to turn 5 until December. That may have been true when you were in school. I know that when my daughter started school, and she's in her early 20s now, that was still the way that it was. So many of you probably went to kindergarten when 4-year-olds could be in kindergarten classes. So a lot of states, though, have changed it so that you have to be 5 before kindergarten starts. So now if you want to come to kindergarten, so this all kind of changed with the Kindergarten Readiness Act of 2010, or SB 1381. So now the age of entry to be able to attend kindergarten is, instead of needing to turn 5 by December 2nd, you now need to turn 5 by September 1st, which is around the time that school would be starting. The other thing that California did to kind of think about changing age of entry is they started something called transitional kindergarten, or TK. So this is being offered to children who turn 5 somewhere between September and December. So those kids who would have been able to go to kindergarten previously, and they now can't because the age of entry has changed, they would be offered the opportunity to go to a transitional kindergarten class rather than needing to be in a preschool class, potentially again, maybe repeating a 4-year-old class one more time. And you can see in the YouTube video down at the bottom of the screen, you can check out more about transitional kindergarten and how it works. Another strategy that's sometimes used with regard to changing age of entry is just having kids wait, not come when they're age ready. So like I said on the previous slide, one strategy is to change the age of entry so that children just can't come until they reach a certain age. And then the other is to say, hey, you don't seem like you're ready, even though you've met the age requirements, maybe you should wait it out. And that's called redshirting. So listen to the other audio clip on this slide and you can see a little bit more about what redshirting is. Fun fact, redshirting is actually a sports term. It means sitting on the bench. So if you've ever played a sport and you were second string and sat on the bench, you were redshirted. And it got appropriated and used as a term for kindergarteners who wait out. They are age eligible, but for one reason or another, they don't come to kindergarten on time. So the first two strategies that we talked about, using standards and using developmental screens, are actually both very useful tools. It is helpful to think about what we can be doing in early childhood classrooms, as long as we don't push down and try to be kindergarten or elementary school when we don't need to be, but to be aware of what children can be doing at their particular ages. So have a good solid understanding of what those milestones are. As long as your state has a good set of standards that are paired with those milestones, it can be a very helpful tool to make sure that we're maximizing early childhood environments in the best way that we can, as long as we're still maintaining that child-directed, play-based kind of experiential learning. Having a developmental screen is also helpful as well. So again, if those developmental screens are not used to keep kids out, but are used really for the purpose of thinking about what it is we can do to make kindergarten environments better for children and make sure that we support kids who don't come in right out of the gate with every skill that they need, those can both be very advantageous strategies. So the one that I do want to talk about is changing age of entry, because there is some information that is important for us to pay attention to with regard to that strategy. So the first thing that I want to talk about is TK. So TK is relatively new. It didn't start all that long ago, so data is still coming out about the efficacy of TK. So I would encourage you to take a look at the link that I've provided on this page so you can see more detail about the efficacy of TK, if it's been working or not. One of the concerns that still exists is making sure that those folks who teach TK have the proper credentials and educational background, because many of them are displaced elementary school teachers who really don't know a whole lot about little kids and early childhood education. So we want to make sure that these kids get the right kinds of teachers and that it doesn't just turn into mini kindergarten where they're being asked to do things that maybe aren't developmentally appropriate. The whole point of keeping kids out of kindergarten until they are 5 is to make sure that they're ready. So we don't want to be giving them educational opportunities that really don't match their developmental needs. But I do want to say that some of the early data that's come out about TK does show that there is some usefulness. So you can see on this graphic down at the bottom of the slide, it says a study of California's transitional kindergarten program found that students who attended transitional kindergarten were better prepared than those who did not. So they did better in letter word identification, they did a little better in phonological awareness, about the same in quantitative concepts, and a little bit better in applied problems. So there does seem to be some utility, at least in an academic sense, for children going to TK. But we do want to remember that we're not just measuring whether children are doing better academically, because there's all those other developmental domains that we want to make sure that children are doing well in addition to. According to the article in the link below and other research studies and articles on redshirting, redshirting is a little bit of a mixed bag in terms of outcomes, but overall it doesn't really seem to do a whole lot of good. The benefits that you get seem to fade out fairly quickly, and there seem to be some detractors. So most educators and scholars don't recommend redshirting, but take a look at the article and see for yourself.